Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to introduce the subject of the New Deal. New Deal is implemented by Franklin Roosevelt, otherwise known as FDR, during the 1930s. The Great Depression is this cataclysmic effect that builds on discontent that we find in Western civilization after World War I. So not only do you have the devastation of the war, but now you have an economic wilderness as well. And for many people, especially in Europe, we see a turn towards radicalism, radical fascism or radical socialism. Franklin Roosevelt is less radical. He is definitely progressive. He is definitely much more progressive than any president we've seen in American history so far. But he believes in reforming from within rather than totally changing the system. So in Europe, around this time, we're going to see Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, these villains of history, or people who are seen as villains of history, who are totally trying to remake their states and their societies and the relationship of their citizens with their governments. And Roosevelt wants, or doesn't necessarily want to, but is certainly going to totally change the relationship of the American citizen with the American government through the New Deal. But he's not going to do this through a new government and a new society. He's going to try and change what's already there. And Franklin Roosevelt had grown up in wealth. He was a cousin of the former President Theodore Roosevelt. He married another cousin named Eleanor. He was very successful early in life, kind of the opposite of his cousin Theodore or Teddy Roosevelt. He's very successful, very athletic early in life, winning elections. 2 years after he graduates from college or finishes his education, he goes to law school after college. And then he suffers from polio and becomes an invalid. Can only walk with assistance, spends most of the rest of his life in a wheelchair, but with the help of his wife, he fights through this disease and returns to politics. One of his great gifts as a politician is his ability to engage with voters, that it said that he enjoyed interacting and speaking with voters. He comes to the presidency in a time of great crisis. Americans from 1929 to 1932 have continued to see their lives get worse and worse, see the situation get more and more desperate. Whatever Hoover's administration tries seems to have been unsuccessful. And so people are looking to Roosevelt for leadership, and most of all, they're looking to him for action. And this is kind of the interesting, one of the interesting aspects of the New Deal. That on one hand, it's going to radically reshape the relationship between the American individual citizen and the federal government. And you could say, well, federal government takes advantage of this situation and imposes this new federal oversight over people's lives. And that would be true up to a point. Certainly, Roosevelt embraced the progressive agenda that said government needs to be more engaged in people's lives to protect them and to take care of them. But you could also say Roosevelt comes to government with this progressive inclination, but at the same time, he's received this mandate from the American people that Americans in the late 20s and the early 30s expected the government to take this role. That Roosevelt had huge support for the government getting involved and helping people in this crisis, which is a different approach. It shows how the culture has changed from earlier periods in American history that were defined by resistance to American involvement in their lives. And Roosevelt admits in his first inaugural address, he doesn't know for certain what absolutely needs to be done, what will turn this situation around. But he does have plans that he's willing to try. And this is the other part of his success as a politician. He shows action. People want to see action from the government. Roosevelt gives them action. He's willing to try different plans in order to make his plan successful. And so his first effort is going to be to try and restore the first part of his program, the New Deal, is going to be to try and restore the financial health of the United States. First, he calls for a 4-day period when the banks will be closed. First time this has ever happened in American history. All the banks will be closed. Financial institutions will have a chance to breathe, to reassess their position, to move forward, rather than simply panicking and trying to sell everything or trying to collect everything and close. And so this is designed to restore confidence. And Roosevelt tries to do the same thing by passing the Emergency Banking Act. One thing about studying the New Deal, there are a lot of acts and organizations that you kind of have to get your head around. But this is an important one, the Emergency Banking Act, which pumps $2 million of new currency into the economy. And so this is basically adopting the approach that when there's a shortage of money in the system, you increase the money supply in order that people will spend and that businesses will grow. Money becomes less, but money becomes less valuable, but people are using it more freely. And Roosevelt takes advantage of the radio to encourage people to invest back into the banks and back into the American economy, at the same time as he insists through legislation that a distinction be drawn between saving accounts and banks and investment accounts and banks. Investment accounts and banks will take the major risks in the stock market, while the savings accounts are going to be much less risky. People's savings are going to be better protected. And he also ensures this protection by establishing the FDIC, a government institution. So this is another important one to know. All the ones I mentioned in the videos, I'm afraid to say, are probably going to be pretty important to know. FDIC, which is an organization that will guarantee savings deposits up to $2,500, which of course back then was a lot more than it is now. And so this was a way in which Roosevelt was trying to restore confidence into the economy and the financial system. He also increases government regulation of the stock market and of Wall Street. He establishes that the government is going to regulate Wall Street. And he does this by establishing the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, to regulate the sale of stocks and bonds. It's the first time, again, that this has been implemented. And it requires that companies disseminate relevant information about their financial health to the public before they sell stocks and shares in this company on the marketplace. This is what's meant by going public. It means that you're putting your company's shares up to be bought and sold. And this is a federal measure designed to ensure that those who are buying stocks and shares in your company know what they're purchasing. And so what Roosevelt is doing through these reforms is establishing that the financial sector of the American economy will be regulated by the government. This is the first way in which the New Deal is increasing the federal government's power and regulation in American life.